everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to another video. Today I want to share with you how to do some easy water marbling with your watercolor markers. Now for each one of my cards, here's the supply list. I'm going to be doing 4 different cards today, but with each sort of technique that I'm doing here, you get 2 cards out of it, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. But to start off with, I am starting off with a surface that is a piece of cardboard with some computer paper on top of it to catch extra color. I've also got 4 cardstock panels. I've got 2 cream and 2 white, and they are all A2 size panels. I've also got a piece of acetate that is much larger than my cardstock panel. I wanted to make sure that I could place this down over the top of my panel and I wouldn't have to worry about going off an edge here or there. So I know if I place this over the top, no matter how off center I am, I'm going to get the color on my panel. I have 4 different colors of markers here that I'm using today. They're all different shades of brown. Now, I chose brown just because that's what I wanted to go with for my cards. You can use any sort of color combination you want here. I would highly suggest looking up color combinations either on Google or Pinterest if you have trouble with that. Look at your sequin mixes to get some ideas. Or you can just Google pictures of marble, and that'll help you figure out what kind of colors you want to use. Also, whenever you Google pictures of your marbling, you want to look at the pattern that is in there. And based off of that, that is what I am drawing onto my acetate. So I'm using Spectrum Noir aqua brushes, and these have a brush tip on them, and that is really helpful here. You want to use a watercolor marker like distress markers or these, any sort of watercolor marker with your brush tip that is easy to draw on these sort of lines. And I am drawing directly on the acetate. Now I am starting off with my darkest brown color here. I like to start off with my with my darkest, go all the way to my lightest, and then I can come back in and add some of those darker sections later on if I want to. So I laid down some of that darkest very sparingly. I just drew in some lines, sort of like little V's here and there. And then I also did a little bit of, not really an oval, but it had a little bit of a circle inside that I could color in some color with my lighter colors. Now I'm moving on to my next step down. So this is my my next step down from the darkest. I colored straight alongside those darkest lines that I had drawn in. Now the great thing about your watercolor markers, if you do get a little bit of the color on the tip of them from other markers, it's okay. You can just scribble that color off and it's not going to contaminate your marker at all. Now I'm moving on to my next step down, and I'm drawing in more and more lines here, going straight up against the shade that I had just drawn on and kind of fanning this out, filling in more as I go lighter. So I went in very sparingly with my darkest, and then as I go down towards my lightest, I'm just going to really start to saturate this acetate. Now you can see that it's starting to bead up a little bit and it'll start to dry on you. That's okay. I'm going to spray this down anyway, so it's okay if it does that. Take your time, get your pattern on the way you want, and you can always go back and re-wet this later. Even if you have to walk away from this for a little bit, that's okay. These can be reactivated with just a spritz of water. So this isn't a technique that you have to be really quick with. I'm finally on to my lightest color, and I'm going to fill in right up against that last color that I drew in. Now I'm going pretty heavy-handed with this lightest color here, and I will leave a few white spots as well. That's okay. If you look at any marbling patterns, they do have white spots in them. So I filled that in. Now I'm going to come back in with a few of those darker colors and just draw in a few more lines to really intensify that color that I lost a little bit. That's just going to give me those nice darker spots. I'll also draw in a few lines here and there, not completely solid, but almost very lightly, and kind of picking my marker up here and there so it skips a little bit. I'm going in over those same lines again. And I'll also come in with my second to darkest color as well and draw on a few more lines as well. I'm going to fuss with this quite a bit just because once I put my water on, that's the end of it. I can't mess with it anymore. It's time to flip it over. But as long as I have it on this side, I can draw in as much color as I want, just add in those fine little details here and there and make sure that this is really looking like I want it to. Now, you may look at this and think it looks like it's not that great of a look, to be honest. But I promise, once you get the water on there, once you smush it down, it looks so much better on the paper. Honestly, the second time you smush it is even better in my opinion, but this first one is a neat effect as well. I've got that second to darkest color on there, and there's a closer look at how it looks on the acetate. It's all bubbled up. That's okay, because right now we're going to go ahead and give it a few mists of water. I'm spraying pretty high up above it. I don't want huge droplets at this point. I just want a fine mist over it to reactivate those colors that have dried. Now, once that's on there, I'm going to carefully put my cream colored cardstock right down onto that paper to catch all the extra color that's going to kind of bleed out. I don't want to make a mess on my work surface. And then I'll overlay that acetate right on top. Now at this point, you want to press it down once. Don't press it too much. Just kind of lay it down there and let it dry. Now I'm pressing a little bit. I didn't have a ton of water on there, but the more you press it, the more you're going to move that color around. So I like to lay it down, let it soak in, and there I've got that great marble pattern on my piece of cardstock that's ready to go on a card. Your paper's going to warp. That's okay. You can straighten it out later on, press it overnight, use a mini iron on it, whatever you want to do. It's just a little bit of warping, nothing that can't be fixed. Now I've went in with that same acetate, liberally sprayed it with more water, and now I'll lay it on another piece of cardstock for the second time. Now this one I'm going to press pretty firmly and move those colors around and create some of those sort of gradients out into the darker and the lighter colors. Kind of mush them together, and then I let that sit. That's why we have a little bit of a jump here. I let it sit, soak into the panel, because if you don't, when you remove that acetate, it's going to pull off all that color. So give it a time to sit and absorb into the cardstock, and there's a closer look at those backgrounds. I'll show you how I finish these cards off in just a moment, but first I'm going to create a few more backgrounds with some different color combinations. So for this one, I've got my little swatch down there that I made sure I like the color combination, and I chose some pinks and reds, and then I've got some very light, almost salmon colors. Again, I am starting off with my darkest color. I'm drawing in just some lines here and there, going in very sparingly with my darkest color at first. And then I'll come back in later on with this as I kind of lose those lines in all of my mush of color. Now for this one, I'm going a little bit more heavy-handed with my drawing. I'm adding more lines and more pattern and texture to this. This is going to turn out different every time you do this technique. That's kind of the beauty of it. You get a different look each and every time you do it. Now for both of these examples, I am using kind of a gradient of colors. I did do this with some reds and greens and browns. That turned out beautiful. I also did some with very light pastel colors, so blues and greens and yellows and pinks and salmons and purples, and that one was gorgeous as well. This is really just about what kind of look you're going for with your card background. If you want to go for a baby card, you can go with those pastel colors. If you wanted to make more of a holiday themed card, you could go in with Halloween colors or anything you want to do. Grays would also be very pretty with this technique. I did do it with those, and that turns out beautiful, especially spraying it with a little bit of perfect pearl pattern like I will be doing in this example here. So I'm on to my medium color. I've just got my lightest color to go, and I'll come in with that one and finally fill in all those little open spaces. Now on this one, I'm leaving a little bit of white peeking out here and there just because I really want that white color to show through. I'm coming back in with my darkest color, adding in those very fine details at this point, darkening up some of that color that I lost here and there. And again, just going in with those very almost skipping lines to add in that fine detail and texture. I'm moving on to my next dark or my next lightest color, and I'm going right up against those same lines. Now again, whenever I was done doing this, all I had to do was scribble off that color onto a sheet of paper, and it was just fine. My markers weren't contaminated. Now, I added Perfect Pearl to my spray bottle. So now I've got some shiny water that I will be spraying onto this one that gives it a little bit of sheen. Doesn't show up well in the video or in the photos, but I promise it's very sparkly in real life and it's beautiful. I gave that a very light mist right over the top just to reactivate some of those colors that had dried down. And now I'm going to be smushing onto plain white cardstock for this background. So you can flip this around, smoosh it whichever way you like the pattern, and I'll just go ahead and lay that right over, give it a good press, and let it sit for just a little bit. Now you can see in the top right hand corner, I didn't have any ink. I didn't go that high up with my marker, so I tried to smush it out a little bit from that point. It didn't want to smush out because at this point there's not a lot of water. So what I'll do is once I pull this up, I can actually take the top left-hand corner or any other place that has a little bit of that color left over it, and I can just smush it right down onto where it was just a little bit too much white, and that's going to give it a little bit of color that I really wanted in there. Now again, there is that finished background. I'll come in with my spray bottle again, really give it a good spray, get those colors moving around again. And I've got my other piece of white cardstock that I'll put down onto my paper and smush it again. This time really pressing around those colors, moving them around underneath that acetate and giving it some time to sit into the paper. Again, you want to let this one sit and don't touch it. Let it sit, give it some time to dry. Then I like to come in with a dry towel and just kind of really give those edges a good press. Make sure that it's pressed into the paper and it's not going to shift around on me as I pull up that acetate. There's a look at that finished background. And here is a closer look at both of them on the finished cards. Now I will show you how I finished off these cards in just a moment, but I have to say that the pink backgrounds were by far my favorite. I tried to get a shot of that shimmer. You can see it a little bit in this photo, but this is such a cool pattern and technique that came out of really a happy accident on my card. Notice that after these dry, I let them air dry. They are warped. This is regular cardstock. I'm adding quite a bit of water. That's going to happen. So I decided to die cut these down for my cards. Sending them through your die cutting machine is going to help flatten them out. You can also lay them under some heavy books overnight. If you have a mini iron, you can do that. A lot of adhesive on the back really helps as well. So it's something you can't avoid. I tried this on watercolor cardstock and the colors just moved around on me a little bit too much. So that's why I went with regular cardstock. Now I wanted to cut out the center of these and add my sentiment to that. I really wanted to keep as much of this background as possible. So I'm just cutting out, I lined it up with the 1 inch mark at the bottom. I'm going to cut that off. Then I'll go ahead and cut off about 3/4 of an inch right in the center, and I'll just keep the top and bottom portions. You can use that leftover strip if you want to. You can save it for another card. It's up to you. Now I did that on 2 of the cards. They're going to be landscape. But on the other 2, I'm actually going to make these portrait, I guess you could say. I always get confused about which one it is. But I'm going to go ahead and line these up with the longer side at 1 inch, cut that off, then again 3/4 of an inch and cut that piece off, and that I will take out and make that little portion my sentiment. So on each one of these, I wanted to add a little bit of dividing to where the sentiment was. So on my pink cardstock, I'm actually going to be using black cardstock. And then for my brown ones, I'll be using brown cardstock to kind of separate. For my sentiments, I'll be using two different sentiments here. I'm going to start off with my ones that are going to have the fold on the long side of the card. I'm going to go ahead and use my Misty to do my stamping just because once I load this up onto my Misty, I know the sentiment is going to be in the right place for both of these cards. So I've got that background loaded in there, and I'm going to place it where I want it to end up on my card. That way, whenever I go to place down my sentiment, I know it's going to be able to peek through these two portions of the background. So I put those down, I'm holding them down with my magnets, and then I'll be using some Inspired by Stamping stamp sets to stamp in my sentiments. I've got a few different options here. On these cards, I'll actually be using Birthday Wishes from this stamp set. I'll line that up in there. I'm lining it up on the right-hand side, right in the center of those two panels. And then once I'm happy with the placement, I can pick up the sentiment with my Misty lid, and I know I've got it in the right place for both cards. I'll be stamping this down with some black dye ink. It matches the black sort of cardstock pieces that I'll be attaching to those panels to separate the sentiment and the background. And I'll stamp that down a few times to get it nice and dark. And then on my other pink card, I'll be using the same sentiment. I line that up again, put in my panels first, lined it up, then I'll remove those panels and stamp it down in the right spot directly on the card base. Each one of these card bases is a white cardstock card base that are A2 in size. Two of them are top folding and two of them are side folding. On my brown cards, I'll be using the same method to stamp these out. I've got Thinking of You instead loaded up though for my sentiment. And instead of black dye ink, I'll be using Rich Cocoa ink from Memento. That's just going to match everything else that I've got going on these cards. So I've got some creams and browns and then my brown cardstock. Then I'm using on the bottoms and tops of my panels to give that separation for the sentiment. On these cardstock strips, I like to use very, very thin paper tape. This I buy at my local craft store. I believe you can find some this thin from Score Tape as well. It's just 1/8 of an inch. I added that onto my cardstock strips, laid those down right along the bottom and the top, and then I just used my scissors to cut them flush. That I know is going to hold. It's going to be nice and secure even with all the warping that's going on with these panels. I'll do the same thing on this next piece. This is my shorter piece, so I'm going to actually put it along the top. I did make sure that this lined up with the pattern, and I just placed those down. Again, I used brown on my brown ones that I made, and then on my pink ones, I'll go ahead and use that black cardstock strip. And these strips that I made are just about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit larger, very, very thin. Now, if you go thinner than this and you can't get any tape like that to fit, you can always use multi-medium matte. Just lay something heavy on top and that will hold that in place while it dries. Now to put these cards together, I'm going to go heavy on the adhesive to hold down those warp pieces. So I've got some Score Tape on the back of all these pieces, and I'm just going to use my Quick Sticks tool to remove that backing paper, and then I can line these up on my card base. So I've got my smallest piece here. I'll go ahead and line this up first on the very bottom. I want to make sure I've got a nice 1/8 of an inch area around the card base on each side, on the right, left, and bottom, and I'll go ahead and place that down. I like to start in the middle and kind of push it out so I don't get any of those weird bubbles right in the middle. And then my top piece, I've added some more Score Tape right on the back. I'll remove that backing paper again with my Quick Sticks tool, and I can place this down right on top. A little tricky because you want to make sure that these are evenly lined up. If you wanted to, you could always keep these the same size as the card base and not have that little bit of white peeking out. That'll make it a little bit easier, but I just wanted to add that little bit of frame around it to dress it up a little bit. These are very simple cards. I use the same exact technique, same exact adhesives on this card. The only thing that's different is these are going to be on the side folding note cards that I made instead of the top folding. So I'll go ahead and place the bottom down like I did before, and then I place the top down, making sure I've got it lined up. Kind of start in the middle and then press out onto both sides. Then I go around the edges and make sure they're really pressed down too. I like to start in the middle because if I started on the edge, sometimes you don't get it lined up perfectly. Then you get a little bit of a bubble in the middle. I've done it on too many cards and I've learned my lesson the hard way. Now on this next card, I'm going to be putting the pink strips down. So I've got the pink with the black cardstock lines, and I put the bottom layer down first, and then I moved on and put the top one right on top, making sure I kept those frames even all the way around the card. With all of my cards completely done, here is a final look at all of them. So there is my first smush of the ink down onto the card panels, and there is the second round. So again, you get two different backgrounds out of one inking up of your acetate, which is awesome. I love things that I can just do one time and I get multiples out of them. Here's a closer look at all of those cards, a little close up of the patterns as well. This is a really fun technique to do, really fun to play around with, and you can do so many different things with it. Add your perfect pearls, add some different colors into the mix. It really is up to you, whatever you want to do. I hope you all give this technique a try. And if you do, I would love to see it as well. I want to thank you guys so much for stopping by and for sticking to the end of this very, very long video. On the left side of your screen, you're going to see a few different links you can click on. Again, thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting.